It is the hottest part of the day in the Negev desert, and a very old man is sitting at the entrance of his tent. He is 99 years old. His wife is 89. They have been married for decades, and in all that time, in all those years of prayers and promises and waiting, there are no children. There has never been a child. And at 99, there will never be a child, not by any logic the world has ever known. His name is Abram. That name, in the ancient Semitic world your Bible was born from, meant exalted father. You have to sit with that for a second. Because Abram has been walking around for the better part of a century with a name that means father, and no child to show for it. Every time he met someone new and said his name, the question would hang there in the air. Exalted father. So where are your children? And he would have to say, again, what he had been saying his entire life. That there were none. He was a wealthy man. He had flocks and servants and a tent city of hundreds. But the name on him was a wound that never closed. And then God shows up. And you might expect God to lead with a miracle. You might expect the first words out of heaven to be about a baby, about a womb opening, about the impossible becoming possible. But that is not where God starts. God starts with a name. No longer shall your name be called Abram. Your name shall be Abraham. The Hebrew here is stunning when you slow it down. Avraham. Father of a multitude. Not just a father, the father of nations plural, of peoples beyond counting, of a family line so wide it would one day include you and every believer across 2,000 years of history. God takes the private, painful name, exalted father of nobody, and blows it open into a promise so enormous it cannot fit inside one man's lifetime. Here's what most people miss about this moment. God changes the name before anything has happened. Sarah's womb is still closed. The child is not even conceived yet. Abraham does not receive the new name after the miracle, he receives it as the miracle. The name itself is the first act of the promise. And then God turns to Sarai. Her name had meant, my princess. A term of affection, yes, but also a word with limits built into it. My princess. Private. Personal. Contained. God changes it to Sarah, simply, princess, without the possessive, and in that small grammatical shift, something opens up. She is no longer just Abraham's. She belongs to the story now. She becomes, in God's economy, the mother of nations too. Her name had always been royal. God just made it universal. You can picture Abraham lying face down in the dirt after this conversation, which is exactly what the text says he did, laughing. Not from disbelief entirely, though there was disbelief, but also from the sheer weight of it. Because for 25 years, every time someone asked his name, the name itself was a kind of accusation. And now the accusation had become a declaration. But there is one name change in this entire list that nobody asks for. One that comes not in a tent, not at an altar, not in a moment of worship. It comes in a desert. And the person receiving it is running away when it happens. We will get there. But not yet. Now we need to talk about a man named Jacob. And to understand what happens to his name, you have to understand what his name already meant, because it was not a good word. Jacob was born clutching his twin brother's heel. That is not a metaphor. That is the actual story. Esau came out first, and Jacob came out with his hand wrapped around his brother's ankle, as if he was trying to drag him back, as if he was already competing before he had taken his first breath. And so they named him Yaakov. Heel grabber. Supplanter. And in the ancient world, a supplanter was something specific. It was someone who trips you to get ahead. A cheat. A schemer. And Jacob lived up to the name. He manipulated his famished brother out of a birthright for a bowl of stew. He dressed in animal skins to fool his blind father into giving him the blessing meant for Esau. He ran. He schemed. He married 2 sisters and spent 20 years in a complicated family arrangement held together by cunning more than love. The name fit him like a coat he had been wearing so long he forgot it was there. But then comes the night at the Jabbok ford. Jacob is alone. He has sent his wives and children and servants across the river ahead of him, because tomorrow he is going to face Esau for the first time in 20 years, and he is terrified. He thinks Esau is coming to kill him. He has heard that Esau has 400 men riding with him. And Jacob, the schemer, has run out of schemes. And in the dark, someone grabs him. The text just says, a man. But you know, and Jacob will know by morning, that this is no ordinary man. They wrestle through the entire night. Not a brief struggle. Not a knockout in the first round. Hours. Both of them, locked in a fight that neither one can finish. And as the sky begins to lighten, the man reaches out and touches Jacob's hip socket. One touch. And Jacob's hip is wrenched completely out of joint. And here is the part that stops me every time I read it. Jacob does not let go. He is injured. He is exhausted. He has been fighting all night long. His hip is dislocated. And he holds on and says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And this is where it gets remarkable. Because the being, who could have ended this at any moment, who dislocated Jacob's hip with a single touch, asks him a question instead of pulling free. What is your name? Think about what God is doing here. He knows Jacob's name. He knows every name. He is asking Jacob to say it himself. To own it. To stand there in the dark, limping and bleeding and exhausted, and say out loud what he has always been. I am Jacob. I am the heel grabber. I am the deceiver. And God says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob. Your name is Israel, because you have striven with God and with men, and you have prevailed. Yisrael, the one who wrestles with God. Not the one who has it figured out. Not the one who never doubted or ran or schemed. The one who held on. He walks away from that river with a limp he will carry for the rest of his life. That limp is part of the story too. Every step Israel takes from that morning forward is a step that announces, I was in a fight. I did not win cleanly. But I did not let go. Jacob's descendants, the 12 tribes, the nation, the people through whom the entire story of redemption runs, they carry that name. Israel. God's wrestler. God's limper. God's one who held on until blessing came. You might be in a fight right now that you have been losing for a long time. Stay with me. Because the question God asked Jacob in the dark is the same question he has always asked before he changes a name. He wants you to say it out loud. What you have always been. What you are afraid you always will be. That is where the conversation starts. The third name change in this list happens fast. Almost too fast to catch if you are not paying attention. Jesus is walking along the Jordan River, and his cousin John points and says, Look, the Lamb of God. And Andrew, who is standing there listening, turns and follows Jesus. And then Andrew goes and finds his brother. And he brings his brother to Jesus. And this is the first time the brother and Jesus have ever met. First time. They are strangers. Jesus looks at him. The text in John chapter 1 says Jesus looked at him. That is a particular word in Greek, emblepo, which means to fix your gaze on something, to look with intention, to really see. Not a casual glance. A full look. The kind of look that takes inventory. And in the moment of that first meeting, before the brother has said a single word, Jesus says, You are Simon the son of John. You shall be called Cephas. In Greek, Petros. In English, Peter. All three words mean the same thing, rock. Now here is what makes this moment strange and beautiful at the same time. Simon Peter has done nothing yet. He has not walked on water. He has not confessed that Jesus is the Christ. He has not denied knowing Jesus 3 times around a charcoal fire on the worst night of his life. He has not preached at Pentecost to 3,000 people. He has not gone to the house of Cornelius and realized that God's mercy was wider than he had ever imagined. None of that has happened yet. Simon is just a fisherman from Galilee. And Jesus hands him a name he has not earned. Josephus, writing about Jewish culture in the 1st century, describes how names in the ancient world were understood to be declarations of destiny, not just labels of identity. You were named what you were becoming, not just what you were. And that framework makes what Jesus does here almost unbearable in its grace. He looks at this ordinary man who smells like fish and makes his living hauling nets, and he sees a foundation. He calls it out before it exists. Here's the part nobody tells you: Peter's life after this moment is full of spectacular failure. He sinks in the water. He rebukes Jesus and gets called Satan. He falls asleep in Gethsemane when Jesus asked him to stay awake. He denies knowing Jesus 3 times, loudly, to a servant girl around a fire, and then goes out and weeps bitterly. None of this cancels the name, because the name was never a reward for good performance. It was a declaration of what God intended, given before Peter had any idea he could live up to it. The rock cracked, badly, publicly, and more than once. But the name held. And after the resurrection, Jesus finds Peter on the beach, restores him with 3 questions to match his 3 denials, and the rock becomes the foundation of the early church. You might be someone who has been handed a name, a sense of calling, a word spoken over you in a moment you can barely remember, and you have spent years feeling like you have not earned it. Like the gap between who you are and what you were told you could be is too wide to close. You are not more disqualified than a fisherman who denied knowing God 3 times in one night. And the name still held. The 4th name change is the quietest one in the list. And in some ways, the most radical. There is no burning bush. No wrestling match. No direct word from heaven. The man's name simply changes in the middle of a sentence in the book of Acts, and if you blink, you miss it. Acts chapter 13, verse 9. Luke has been writing, Saul, for 12 chapters. And then, without ceremony, he writes, but Saul, who was also called Paul. And from that point forward in the narrative, the name Saul disappears. It will only be used again when Paul is recounting his own story, saying, I heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Quoting the past. In the present, he is Paul. That is the entire transition. No angelic announcement. No moment on a mountaintop. Just a quiet shift. But here is why that quiet matters. The name Saul, was a prestigious name in Jewish culture. It was the name of the first king of Israel. To be named Saul in a Jewish household was to be named after royalty. And the man who carried it had lived up to the prestige. He was educated under Gamaliel, one of the most respected rabbis of the age. He was a Roman citizen, a status that took generations to acquire. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees, zealous, respected, climbing. He had the name and the resume to match. Then Damascus happened. The light. The voice. 3 days of blindness. And when he could see again, everything was different, and also nothing in his world would cooperate with that difference. His old colleagues in Jerusalem viewed him with suspicion. The new believers viewed him with terror. This man had been dragging their people off to prison just weeks before. He was a man between 2 worlds with full membership in neither. And somewhere in that uncomfortable in-between, he started going by Paul. Paulos in Greek. Small. Little. Humble. The man who had every reason to hold on to his prestigious name chose the one that meant small. And you have to ask yourself, why? Some scholars suggest it was a practical choice, a Greek name for missionary work in the Greek-speaking world. That is probably true. But there is something deeper happening too, and you can hear it in the letters Paul writes. I am the least of the apostles. I am less than the least of all the saints. I can do all things, but only through Christ who strengthens me. The grammar of Paul's life is the grammar of someone who has stopped trying to be impressive. He laid down the name that meant royalty, and picked up the name that meant small. And then he changed the world. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes when you stop performing your old identity. When you quit trying to prove you are still who you used to be, or who people expected you to be, and you start just being the person God is making you into, even if that person is smaller and quieter and less impressive than the version you used to advertise. Paul figured that out somewhere between Damascus and his first missionary journey. He took the small name, and God filled it. Now, the one who is running, her name is Hagar. And she does not fit neatly into this list, which is exactly why she belongs at the center of it. Hagar is an Egyptian slave woman in the household of Abraham and Sarai. She did not choose that life. She did not apply for the position. She was property in a world that treated women, and especially foreign women, and especially foreign slave women, as furniture. And when Sarah, who was still Sarai at this point, still years away from her own name change, when Sarai could not conceive and grew desperate, she gave Hagar to Abraham to bear a child on her behalf. Hagar became pregnant. And then everything went wrong in the way that only a household with this much unprocessed grief and longing can go wrong. Sarai treated her harshly. The text does not specify what that means exactly, but the word in Hebrew, Anna, carries the sense of affliction, of being pressed down, of being crushed. And Hagar ran. She ran into the wilderness. Alone. Pregnant. No water. No map. No destination. Just away. And this is where the name change happens that nobody expected. Because God finds her there. Not in a temple. Not at an altar. In the desert, beside a spring of water, after she has run as far as she could run. And the angel of God says, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" She answers honestly, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." And God does not scold her for running. He gives her instructions and a promise, a son, and a future, and then says something to her that no one in this entire list receives in quite the same way. "You are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael," which means God hears. Because the Lord has listened to your affliction. God heard her. The woman no one was listening to. The foreign slave woman whose suffering had no legal status, whose feelings had no official weight. God heard her. And Hagar does something remarkable. She gives God a name. She is the only person in the entire Bible, the only one, who names God. She calls him El Roi, the God who sees. "Truly here," she says, "I have seen him who looks after me." She ran from a house where she was crushed. And she found, in the empty desert, a God who had been watching the whole time. Who saw her before she knew she was being seen. She does not get a new name. She is the name giver in this story. And the name she gives to God becomes one of his permanent titles. Here is what you need to understand about Hagar's moment. It is the most democratic name change in the entire list. Abraham had decades of faithful relationship with God before his name changed. Jacob had a lifetime of being the chosen line. Simon Peter was chosen personally by Jesus. Paul had a dramatic encounter on a road outside Damascus. But Hagar had none of that. She was a foreigner. She was a slave. She was a runaway. She had no standing, no covenant, no invitation. And God showed up anyway. Not because she was important by the world's measure. Because she was seen. So here is what you do with all of this. You have Abraham, carrying a name that hurt for 25 years, until the promise arrived and turned the wound into a declaration. You have Jacob, wrestling in the dark with something he could not beat and could not let go of, limping away with a new name and a permanent mark on his body. You have Simon Peter, handed a name he had not earned before he had done a single thing to deserve it. You have Paul, setting down the prestigious name and picking up the small one, and changing the world with the one he chose in humility. And you have Hagar. Running. Alone. Found. 5 name changes. 5 moments where God looked at a person and said, "That is not the whole story of who you are." Here is the first thing you take with you. Your identity is not a verdict handed down by your worst moment. Jacob's name was his worst quality for decades. It literally meant cheat. And then in one night, in a fight he did not start, it became the name of a nation. You are not locked into what you have been called. You are not sentenced to carry the name your failures gave you. Here is the second thing. The new name almost always comes before you feel ready for it. Peter got his before he had done anything to deserve it. Abraham got his before the child existed. You may be sitting with a sense of calling, a word spoken over you, a direction you believe you are supposed to go, and you feel utterly unqualified. That is not a sign you heard wrong. That is the pattern. God calls the thing that is not yet as if it already is, and then He makes it so. And here is the third thing, the one I want you to carry longest. If you are running right now, if you are in a desert of your own making or someone else's making, and you feel like you are outside the story, outside the covenant, outside the reach of anyone who cares whether you make it, hear this. Hagar was a foreign slave woman with no standing and no invitation and no reason to expect that God was paying any attention to her at all. And God found her beside a spring in the wilderness and said, I see you. I have always seen you. I heard you before you knew you were being heard. She gave God a name that day. El Roi. The God who sees. He still answers to it. If this story connected with something you needed today, share it with someone who is in a desert right now. They need to know that the God who renamed Abraham and Jacob and Peter and Paul, that same God, sees them too. And if you want to go deeper on the people in this story, hit subscribe. There is a lot more to find here. The God who sees has not stopped looking.